Thank you, Grania. So my name is David Dolan, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my Nuffield topic to you this morning. Net zero emissions farming, the challenges and opportunities for farmers and co-ops. So as the title suggests, emissions from farming is a two-way street. We have a fairly good indication or a good understanding of the methane emissions, the nitrous oxide emissions and the carbon dioxide emissions coming from our farms. What we don't have as clear an understanding of is the carbon capture and the carbon sinks that exist on our farms. As part of my Nuffield travel, I got to the UK, Brussels, Italy, New Zealand, Brazil, Costa Rica and the United States of America. And what I saw pretty consistently was companies, farms, processors that were claiming to be net zero were removing as many of their emissions as possible, but with the residual emissions were producing renewable energies from their businesses to offset the residual emissions or the purchase of carbon credits. Now these two activities do not work in an Irish context. Carbon credits do not have a universal standard and so cannot be included in our national inventories. And renewable energy production that would come from farms gets accounted for in our energy sector and not our agriculture sector. Just with that in mind, I decided to focus my case studies for this presentation on an Irish context and talk about how we could get to net zero within the context of the Irish greenhouse gas emissions accounting system. So the EPA is responsible for reporting Irish greenhouse gases to the IPCC, and it does so through the National Inventory Report. So I've taken this table from the report, and it just shows the key sources and sinks of greenhouse gas emissions within the Irish economy. This system works very well for quantifying the amount of emissions. Every source of emissions gets plugged into its relevant category or subcategory on this table. Where this system falls down is when a nuanced or an innovative approach to greenhouse gas reductions is taken that crosses between the different categories of this table. A farming business, for example, whose main activity would belong in the agriculture section, could decide to plant a portion of their land in forestry or grow an energy crop for the use of renewable energy production. These two activities will be accounted for in the land use or energies categories. Similarly, a farmer could decide to install an anaerobic digester and take food waste from a neighbouring town or city, or produce biomethane from their own farm business. This activity would get accounted in the waste category or the energy category. So this characteristic of the current system is acting as a barrier to innovative approaches to greenhouse gas emissions, which would reduce the overall emissions of the entire economy. And if we're serious about reaching a goal of net zero by the year 2050, which has been set out by the European Union, this system needs to be upgraded to a more sophisticated system that can account for a nuanced approach that crosses the different emissions categories. So what is possible today? Salahead Farm is a Teagasc research farm owned by Tipperary Co-op, which is led by Dr. James Humphreys. And they have reported a carbon footprint of 0.69 kg CO2 equivalent per kg of fat and protein corrected milk for milk produced in 2022 on their zero nitrogen trials. So they're spreading zero chemical nitrogen on their swards to grow feed for their cows, instead using red and white clover to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and grow feed to feed their cows. Farm Zero C is a collaboration between UCD and Carberry Co-op and has a stated goal of reaching net zero by the year 2027. And they have reported a carbon footprint of 0.66 kg CO2 equivalent per kg of fat and protein corrected milk. And they're using a range of different activities to reduce their emissions, including the incorporation of mixed species, slurry inoculants to reduce methane coming from their slurry stores, along with a range of other activities. But interestingly, they're still using 150 kgs of nitrogen on their grass-only swards They're measuring sequestration, which is happening on farm, but it hasn't yet been applied to that figure. And they're trialling a feed additive which would reduce the methane coming from their cows. Gavin Hunt, the project manager of Farm Zero C, has stated that early models of good sequestration happening on farm could drop that level, or that figure of 0.66 down to 0.41 kg CO2 equivalent. And then if we were to remove the residual 150 kgs of nitrogen, which Solihead has already proven can be done, and included the feed additive, that figure of 0.66 could drop to between 0.2 and 0.3 kg CO2 equivalent. And this represents an incredibly low carbon footprint per litre of meat produced. But it is important at this stage to point out that the cow is responsible for 67% of the greenhouse gas emissions produced on dairy farms. And so removing the residual emissions from this system without removing cows from the system, reduce stocking rates, and so reducing profitability, is going to be incredibly difficult. ARC Zero is an EIP based in Northern Ireland and led by Professor John Gilliland. They're looking to plot a path towards carbon neutrality for agriculture in the north. They've taken the approach of accounting for the amount of soil sequestration or sequestration happening on farms to see how it affects the emissions profile of different enterprises. And we see at the top of that list the two dairy farms, and dairy farming in the north is slightly more intensive than it is here in the south. But when gross sequestration is added to their gross emissions, a figure of 27% reduction in overall emissions is seen. And what this table shows us is, as we drop down that list and the systems become that bit more extensive, the effect that sequestration has on their overall emissions increases. And even at the bottom, we can see that some farms can be net positive in that they're sequestering more carbon than they are emitting. So what this table shows us is that not all farms will ever be able to get to net zero, but equally some farms can be net positive. And the logical conclusion to that is some form of carbon trading will be needed between farm systems in order to get all of Irish agriculture to net zero. So where are the opportunities? At the moment, carbon credits are the Wild West in that there is no standard, there's no universal standards being used across the world, and so they cannot be included in our inventories. But the good news is the EU are in the process of standardising a framework for the voluntary certification of carbon removals, which will allow small and medium-sized businesses to participate in the carbon market. And then if we consider a tonne of carbon is set to be priced at around €100 a tonne by 2030 and €200 a tonne by the year 2045. Afforestation can sequester between 1 and 9 tonne of carbon per hectare per year. Carbon farming can do between 0.5 and 2 tonne of carbon per hectare per year. And water table management could mitigate against the emission of 20 tonne of carbon per hectare per year. This could prove to be a lucrative diversification for Irish farmers if the proper frameworks are put in place to allow for this. I think our co-ops are uniquely positioned in an Irish context to manage carbon credits for our farmers in order to facilitate the reduction of, or bringing the industry to a net zero target. So for my conclusions, the EU's targets for 2050 is net zero and not gross zero, and a lot more of an emphasis needs to be put on the amount of carbon capture that's happening on farms. Greater precision is needed in our national inventory report to bring all levels of data feeding into the inventory up to Tier 2, which will be country level data, and Tier 3, which would be farm level data, in order to pick up changes being made at farm level. Not all farms can be net zero, but equally some farms can be net positive, and this needs to be recognised. Carbon farming requires high levels of high quality data, and this is going to cost money. It involves taking soil cores, deep soil cores, that are geotagged and retested at regular intervals, 3 to 5 years over time, to pick up changes in soil organic matter. And the EU standardising a carbon credit opens doors for new money to be brought into Irish agriculture, and so could be a huge opportunity for farmers. My recommendations would be So the whole industry needs to settle on a direction of travel. There's probably too many contradictory voices coming from different parts of Irish agriculture at the moment. And farmers need consensus and a consistent message if we are to invest long term and make the changes needed to reach the targets that have been set for us. Increased investment is needed in the national inventory data in order to bring all levels of data up to Tier 2 and Tier 3 levels. A national carbon baselining programme is needed to facilitate our participation in the carbon market. We need a stepping off point because we cannot manage what we don't measure. And this will cost money and it will take time. And the establishment of a carbon insetting bank will be needed in order to facilitate the trading of credits between farms and also to regulate the market to ensure that carbon credits produced on Irish farms stay within Irish agriculture in order to get all of the agricultural industry to net zero before looking at trading outside of our industry. And just before I finish up, I suppose what this report has showed me is that there is a pathway forward for farmers, and that with the correct mindset, we don't need to be afraid of targets and rules and regulations that are coming down the line. I'd like to thank Nuffield Ireland for the opportunity to do the scholarship, or I'd like to thank the main sponsors. My main sponsor is the Golden Jubilee Trust, to my family who are down in the crowd, and to my girlfriend Catherine, who has the patience of a saint. I've done this presentation about 100 times in the last couple of weeks. So she could do it if I couldn't do it. Thank you very much.